There's something almost unsettling about silence in an age obsessed with visibility. A time where every coffee cup, every fleeting sunset, every passing thought becomes content. Where lives unfold in squares and stories curated for strangers we may never meet. And yet, some people remain almost invisible online. They scroll quietly, observe deeply, laugh at things no one will ever know they saw. Their profiles sit untouched for months, sometimes years, like closed doors in a house filled with noise. To most, it's a mystery. Why stay unseen when the whole world is performing presence? Why choose privacy when attention is the currency everyone seems to chase? It's easy to call it introversion or disinterest, but for many Black people, this silence carries a different weight, a different history, a different psychology. Because their absence is rarely emptiness. It is intention. It is protection. It is the quiet architecture of a self built carefully in a world that watches them differently. Silence rarely begins as a choice. It often begins as awareness. A moment, small, forgettable to others, when a Black person realizes that being seen does not feel neutral. That visibility comes with weight, with eyes that interpret before they understand, with assumptions that arrive faster than truth. Maybe it starts in school, a harmless joke that wasn't harmless. A teacher who praises confidence in others but calls theirs attitude. A comment about their hair, their voice, their family said casually but felt deeply. And suddenly something shifts. They begin to understand that being visible can also mean being misread. Or maybe it begins at home. A quiet warning wrapped in love. Be careful what you say online. People don't see you the same way. They'll judge you faster than they judge others. These lessons don't come from paranoia. They come from experience, generations of it. So the child learns early. Visibility is not the same thing as freedom. As they grow older, the shift becomes instinct. They think twice before posting a joke. They hesitate before expressing frustration. They worry about tone, about misinterpretation, about how easily sincerity can be twisted into stereotype, and so they begin to shrink, not inwardly but publicly. They speak loudly in real life but quietly online. They share brilliance privately but offer silence to the crowd. A subtle self-editing begins, not out of fear, but out of understanding. The internet does not always know how to hold them gently. This is where the disappearance starts, not as hiding, but as self-protection. There is a psychological term for what begins to form here, a quiet, persistent awareness of being observed, not the ordinary kind, but the kind shaped by history, stereotype, and expectation. Psychologists call it identity vigilance. It's the constant scanning of how one might be perceived, interpreted, or misread. For many Black people, this vigilance becomes second nature long before adulthood. It is not paranoia, it is pattern recognition. The mind learning over years that visibility can be both opportunity and target. There is another word too, impression management. Most people use it lightly, choosing an outfit, curating a profile, polishing a sentence. But for Black people, it often becomes a survival skill. A way of shaping how the world sees them so the world does not shape them into something untrue. And then there is the deeper wound, racialized scrutiny. It's subtle, it's quiet, but it is everywhere. The sense that one mistake will not be seen as individual, but as confirmation of a narrative older than oneself. So when someone chooses not to post, it is not always avoidance. Sometimes it is an act of control. The refusal to let strangers misinterpret their tone, their humor, their softness, their truth. This isn't just silence, the psychology whispers. This is strategy. This is protection. This is a wound learned early, carried quietly, and managed daily. This is where the wound travels inward, where it stops being an external caution and becomes a part of how someone sees themselves. Because over time, the message becomes familiar. Be careful. Be composed. Be uncontroversial. Be someone the world won't misunderstand. And slowly the self begins to split. One version moves through real life, laughing freely with close friends, speaking honestly, existing without translation. The other version appears online, measured, minimal, visible only in ways that feel safe. This is the psychology of self-curation, a quiet, constant negotiation of identity. For many Black people, it starts with small exchanges. The joke they delete because someone might read it as aggression. The thought they rewrite 3 times because tone is a fragile thing. The moment they want to celebrate something but hesitate because joy too is vulnerable when misread. Eventually, posting begins to feel like performance, a stage where everything they share becomes public property, open to critique, distortion, or unwanted projection. The nervous system learns this early. It remembers the sting of being judged quickly. It remembers the discomfort of explaining themselves in rooms where no one else had to explain anything. And so silence becomes sanctuary, a place where authenticity does not require defense. Another layer forms: emotional conservation. When you've had to be strong for so long, you don't waste energy offering pieces of yourself to people who haven't earned them. You save your softness for those who see you fully. The internalization deepens further. Life teaches them that privacy is not secrecy, it's survival. Because being Black online is not just sharing a life, it is navigating a landscape where stereotypes travel faster than truth, where misunderstandings escalate quickly, where vulnerability feels dangerous. This is why some people withdraw quietly, not because they lack expression, but because they are full of it, too full to risk being flattened into something shallow. Instead of posting, they observe, they listen. They study the world with depth and intuition. And in that silence, something profound develops. Self-awareness unfiltered by an audience. Their life becomes real again. Not curated, not performed, but lived. And inside that quiet, they begin to discover parts of themselves that would never survive under the gaze of strangers. There is a grief that rarely gets named. A grief that sits quietly beneath the silence of Black people who don't post. The kind that doesn't erupt, it settles, soft, heavy, unquestioned. It's the grief of always being aware of how words land, aware of how tone is heard, aware of the invisible line between honesty and misinterpretation. It's the grief of feeling watched even when no one is looking. A childhood spent being told to be careful, to not give anyone a reason, to stay composed because mistakes cost you more than they cost others. It's the grief of knowing that vulnerability for you isn't just emotional, it's political. So you begin to hold yourself differently. You hide the softness that feels too fragile for public spaces. You guard your joy because joy can be mocked, questioned, or minimized. You bury your anger because anger is easily weaponized against you. You shrink not because you are small, but because the world insists on misunderstanding anything larger. And beneath all of that is another ache. The ache of wanting to be fully seen but not wanting to be misseen. The ache of wanting to share parts of your life but not wanting strangers to twist the meaning of it. The ache of having stories worth telling but feeling safer letting them live privately where nuance can breathe. This grief is quiet, but it is not weak. It is the grief of someone who has learned too early that the world does not always earn the right to witness their truth, so they hold their truth close, not out of fear, but out of tenderness, protecting the parts of themselves that the world once handled carelessly. There is a science behind the silence, a psychology beneath the instinct to stay unseen. For many Black people, especially those raised in environments shaped by racism, the nervous system learns vigilance early. Not imagine danger, experience danger. Tone shifts, stares that linger, rules applied unevenly, consequences harsher for the same mistakes. The body keeps score before the mind knows the language. So the nervous system adapts, tuning itself to caution. This adaptation often becomes what psychologists call anticipatory regulation. The constant act of managing yourself before others can misinterpret you. Online, this instinct deepens. Social media is not neutral. It is a stage, a place where perception outruns truth, where a single post can be stripped of nuance, where Black expression is too often filtered through stereotypes older than the platform itself. Psychologists describe this as identity risk, the fear that your story will be distorted, minimized, or used against you. There is also double consciousness, the internal split between how you see yourself and how you know the world might see you. Posting triggers that split. It invites scrutiny. It invites projection. It invites interpretation by people who do not share the context needed to understand the whole story. Add to this the concept of psychological ownership, the need to keep certain memories, joys, and stories untouched by outside judgment. The more a person values authenticity, the more they protect it from environments where authenticity can be misread. So the silence isn't avoidance, it's regulation. It's protection. It's the mind choosing the safest place to breathe. By adulthood, the silence has become familiar. Not lonely, protective. Not empty, intentional. Adults who rarely post often live with a kind of inner clarity. They have learned, sometimes painfully, that visibility is a currency that costs more for them than for others. So they invest it carefully. Relationships become the place where their truth lives, not the feed. They open slowly, deliberately, choosing depth over display. They are the friend who listens more than they speak, the partner who feels deeply but reveals gradually, the family member who holds entire histories quietly in their chests. But there are patterns too, not weaknesses, echoes. Some develop hyper-independence, believing that needing nothing is safer than risking being misunderstood. Some become overly private, protecting their inner world so intensely that letting others in feels like exposure. Some struggle with emotional visibility, not because they lack feeling, but because being publicly vulnerable feels dangerous, even when the threat is no longer present. Others feel a constant pull toward authenticity, yet an equally strong pull toward safety. This tension shapes the rhythm of their relationships. Slow trust, steady connection, profound loyalty, and beneath it all is a truth they rarely say out loud. They want to be known, just not by everyone. They want to be seen, just not consumed. They want to be understood, not interpreted. Their silence is not a wall, it is a filter, a boundary carved from experience. A way of deciding who has earned the right to witness the parts of them that once had to hide. At some point, something shifts. Not loudly, not dramatically. More like a quiet click of understanding deep in the chest. Maybe it happens during adulthood, when they realize how drained they feel after explaining themselves again and again. Or maybe it arrives in a moment online. A viral incident, a careless comment, a reminder that visibility doesn't guarantee safety. Suddenly, the pattern becomes clear. They were never antisocial, never mysterious for no reason, never too quiet. They were adaptive. Their silence had purpose. They begin to see the architecture of their behavior, the watchfulness, the calculated pauses, the instinct to curate their presence carefully. And then the recognition comes. This isn't who I truly am. This is who I had to become. It's the moment they realize that the world taught them to stay small long before they had the language to question it. That they weren't private by nature. They were private for survival. And beneath the silence, beneath the hesitation to share, there is someone who once wanted to be open, expressive, unguarded. This is the turning point. The realization that what once protected them now limits them. That silence was a shield, but it also became a cage. Not broken, not wrong, just outdated. This awareness doesn't demand action. It simply illuminates the truth. The silence was never a flaw. It was an inherited survival pattern finally revealing itself. This is where gentleness becomes necessary, where the narrator speaks softly, as if addressing the younger self still curled inside the adult. You weren't weak, you were adapting. Those words begin to melt something. They start to understand that their silence wasn't cowardice. It was intelligence, a way of navigating a world where their joy, their expression, their humanity was too often misread. The restraint they learned, it was protection. The privacy they clung to, it was safety. The distance they kept, it was survival. No one taught them how to be fully seen without feeling at risk. So they taught themselves how to stay small, how to remain unexposed, how to exist without inviting unnecessary interpretation. But the compassionate truth is this: they deserved a world where visibility wasn't dangerous, where their story wasn't filtered through stereotypes, where their presence didn't require calculation. Their silence was never a failure. It was a response to conditions they didn't create. And now with awareness, the tone shifts. Instead of criticizing themselves for being too private, they begin to see the strength in their boundaries, the wisdom in their discernment, the humanity in their desire for safety. The reframe isn't about becoming louder. It's about understanding the silence they learned and choosing, slowly, gently, what parts of it still served them and what parts were inherited from a world that demanded their caution. Healing doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive in a moment of confidence or a sudden desire to be seen. It begins quietly, like a soft loosening inside the chest. A moment when the body realizes it no longer has to brace for impact every time it's witnessed. For many Black people who learn to stay silent online, healing begins with permission, not from others, from themselves. The permission to exist without managing perception. The permission to speak without shrinking. The permission to be seen without performing. It shows up in small ways, choosing authenticity over approval, sharing a thought with someone trusted, letting a real laugh slip out in a room that once felt unsafe, holding a moment of joy without asking who might misunderstand it. Healing can look like reclaiming space, not publicly, but internally. A gentle acknowledgement. My voice is not a threat. My visibility is not a danger. My presence does not need to be negotiated. It can look like recognizing that privacy was once a shield, but now it can also be a choice, not a cage. It can look like slowly allowing your story to belong to you again, not to the projections of strangers or the expectations of a world that has scrutinized you for generations. And perhaps the most tender part of healing is learning to trust softness, to believe that vulnerability does not always end in harm, that being witnessed does not always mean being misinterpreted. Healing is not about becoming louder. It is about becoming whole. It is not about proving anything. It is about finally breathing without fear. It is the beginning of returning to yourself, the self untouched by caution, the self that existed before the world taught you to hide. In the end, silence is not the absence of a story. It is the presence of one too precious to give away carelessly. For the Black person who rarely posts, who lives quietly in a world built on spectacle, their invisibility was never a weakness. It was a shield, a sanctuary, a way of staying whole in spaces that rarely honored their wholeness. But healing brings something softer, a shift barely noticeable, like light returning to a room that has been dim for years. They begin to understand that being unseen is not the same as being unknown. That privacy can coexist with connection. That silence can coexist with truth. That visibility, when chosen rather than forced, can be something sacred. The child within them, the one who learned caution too early, who carried the weight of perception like armor, is finally met with gentleness. And in that meeting, something frees itself. Not to be loud, not to perform, but simply to exist without fear. Because the story was never about the absence of posting. It was about the presence of self. A self rediscovered, a self reclaimed, a self no longer shaped by the eyes of others, a self finally allowed to breathe.